In 1986, something strange rolled out onto the floor of the Detroit Auto Show. It looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie, or maybe on a racetrack from another planet. It had a bubble-like glass roof, doors that lifted up instead of out, and a body made from materials you would not expect on a regular streetcar. It was called the Corvette Indie, and it was Chevrolet's way of asking, what if the future came faster than we thought? The Corvette Indie was designed during a time when General Motors wanted to show off what their engineers and designers could do. Chuck Jordan, who was the vice president of GM Design, wanted something bold. He handed that job to designer Tom Peters. The idea was not to build a production car, but a concept vehicle filled with futuristic ideas, and they went all in. The Corvette Indie was low, sharp, and wide. It was made from Kevlar and carbon fiber, which made it light and strong. It had a long, pointed nose and a short back, looking more like a spaceship than a car. This design would later help inspire the Corvette ZR12 and even leave its mark on the mid-engine C8 Corvette many years later. At first, the car had a 2.65-liter twin-turbocharged V8 engine made by Ilmor Engineering. This engine was based on the ones used in IndyCar racing and made over 600 horsepower. But for the working prototype, General Motors used a 5.7-liter V8 engine tuned by Lotus Engineering. That engine made about 380 horsepower and 370 pound-feet of torque. It could hit 60 miles per hour in under 5 seconds and reach a top speed over 180 miles per hour. Not bad for a car nobody could actually buy, but speed was just one part of the story. The Corvette Indy was stuffed with advanced technology. It had all-wheel drive and four-wheel steering, which gave it great grip and tight turning. It had active suspension developed with Lotus, which adjusted the ride in real time. It also had drive-by-wire steering, meaning the steering wheel sent electronic signals instead of using a normal mechanical link. That was a big deal in 1986, and on the inside, it had a rear-view camera and a screen with digital gauges and vehicle information. That screen even showed navigation, which was not normal back then. Some people probably thought it came from a video game. The Corvette Indy was not meant to go into production. It was more of a rolling science lab, but it mattered. It showed what was possible. And although most people never got to drive one or even see one in person, parts of it lived on in future cars. General Motors used lessons from the Indy in the Corvette ZR1, in the later ZR12 prototype, and decades later in the 2020 Corvette C8. So even though the Corvette Indy disappeared, its weird ideas stuck around. In the early 1990s, while the automotive world was busy admiring the Dodge Viper and dreaming about Japanese sports cars, something strange was hiding inside General Motors. It was a Corvette, but not just any Corvette. It had a nose that looked a bit longer, a hood that seemed like it was stretched by a mad scientist, and an engine so big that it barely fit inside. This was the 1990 Chevrolet Corvette ZR12, also known by the nickname Conan. It never made it to the showroom, but it did something more important. It asked the question, what if we gave a Corvette 12 cylinders and watched what happened? The ZR12 was built as an engineering mule, not as a production car. That means it was made for testing, not for selling. The idea was to create a Corvette that could fight the Dodge Viper head-on. At that time, the Dodge Viper was still getting ready for its big debut. It had a massive V10 engine, and Chevrolet wanted to know if their Corvette platform could handle something even more extreme. To do this, Chevrolet turned to a company called Ryan Falconer Industries. Ryan Falconer had been building racing engines, marine engines, and even aircraft engines. For the ZR12, Falconer built a huge V12 engine. It was made of aluminum and was based on small block Chevrolet engine designs. This engine was not just long, it was nearly 9 inches longer than a regular V8. It made around 700 horsepower and 750 pound-feet of torque. That was a lot of power, especially for a car from 1990. But fitting the Falconer V12 into the Corvette was not simple. The C4 Corvette chassis had to be stretched by about 8 inches just to fit the engine. This made the car look longer, and it changed the balance of the whole vehicle. Still, the engineers managed to keep the extra weight down. The car only gained about 100 pounds thanks to the aluminum construction of the engine. Even though the car had all this power, it never raced or made it to the streets. It was just one prototype. The ZR12 stayed in General Motors testing facilities, and later it was shown at the National Corvette Museum. People who saw it in person were often surprised. Many did not even know a 12-cylinder Corvette ever existed. The 1990 Corvette ZR12 Conan was not built to win trophies or break sales records. It was built to explore the edge of what was possible. It might not have been pretty, and it was never fast around a racetrack, but it still lives on as one of the weirdest questions Chevrolet ever asked. What if we took a Corvette and gave it a V12? In the 1960s, Chevrolet was in the middle of a quiet fight. Inside General Motors, people were arguing about where to put the engine in their future sports cars. Some wanted it in the front, like always. Others wanted it in the middle, like European race cars. But one group went completely off the rails. They put it in the back. And that decision gave us one of the strangest cars in Corvette history. It was called the XP819. It only existed as a single prototype, and it nearly vanished forever. The XP819 was created in 1964 as a test car, not for showrooms. It came out of an engineering idea from Frank Winchell. He worked for Chevrolet and believed that a rear engine layout could work, even for a powerful car like the Corvette. Zora Arkus Duntov, the man most people know as the father of the Corvette, disagreed. He thought that putting the engine in the back would mess up the handling, but Frank Winchell pushed forward with help from designer Larry Shinoda. Larry Shinoda had already worked on some major designs for Chevrolet. He took the assignment seriously and created a long, low, and sharp-looking fiberglass body. It had styling ideas that would later appear in the 1968 Corvette, like the pointed front and the Coke bottle side curves. But this car had something very different. It carried a full 327 cubic inch engine behind the seats. That engine was actually a reverse rotation version of Chevrolet's 327 V8 used in marine boats. It was paired with a 2-speed automatic transaxle taken from a 1961 Pontiac Tempest. The XP819 sat on a custom chassis made of steel with a backbone layout. It had wide 10-inch rear wheels and 6-inch front wheels to help balance the weight. Even then, almost 70% of the weight sat on the rear axle. During tests at the Milford Proving Grounds, it pulled strong cornering numbers, up to 1G on a skid pad. But the moment it had to change direction quickly, things went wrong. Engineer Paul Van Valkenburg tried testing it with matching tire sizes front and back, and the car lost control and crashed. General Motors ordered the XP819 to be destroyed, but division head Simon Bunky Knudsen saved it by sending it to Smokey Yunick, a famous race car builder in Daytona Beach, Florida. Smokey took it apart and stored the pieces. Years later, Corvette fan Steve Tate found the parts at a sale and bought them. He and Delmar Hines, a drag racer, reassembled the car just in time to show it at Bloomington Gold in 1978. Advertising man Ed McCabe owned it next. Then Mike Yeager from Mid-America Motorworks bought it at auction in 2002. Mike sent the XP819 to Corvette Repair Inc. in New York, where Kevin Mackay led a full rebuild that took 6,500 hours. Today, the XP819 lives in Effingham, Illinois. It never became a production car, but it shows what can happen when engineers get curious and stubborn. Some ideas crash and burn, literally, but they still help shape what comes next. In 1988, something unusual happened in the quiet town of Old Lyme, Connecticut. A group of engineers, led by Reeves Calloway, decided to build a car that didn't just go fast. It had to be the fastest street-legal car in the world. They weren't part of a big company like Ferrari or Porsche. Instead, they worked out of a small facility and used a Chevrolet Corvette as their base. What they created was called the Callaway Sledgehammer. It looked like a regular Corvette to most people, but under the surface, it was a very different machine. This car would go on to reach a speed that no one expected, and it did it without any wings or fancy body tricks. Reeves Callaway used a 5.7-liter Chevrolet Bowtie small block V8 engine as the starting point. The engine had a 4-bolt main NASCAR spec block, forged maul pistons, and a Cosworth crankshaft. The cylinder heads came from Brodix and were made of aluminum, but that was just the beginning. The real power came from 2 Turbonetics to 4B turbochargers. They pushed up to 22 pounds per square inch of boost. To keep everything cool, the team added intercoolers to the front. The final power output was 880 horsepower at 6,200 revolutions per minute and 772 pound-feet of torque at 5,250 revolutions per minute. At first, the transmission was a Doug Nash 5-speed manual, used during the record-setting test. Later, it was replaced with a ZF 6-speed manual for normal use. With all this power, the Callaway Sledgehammer could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 3.9 seconds. It completed the quarter mile in 10.6 seconds at 146 miles per hour. But the big number came on October 26, 1988. At the Transportation Research Center's 7.5-mile test track in East Liberty, Ohio, with driver John Lingenfelter behind the wheel, the car hit a top speed of 254.76 miles per hour. That record would stand for nearly 20 years. But the Sledgehammer wasn't just a straight-line car. Carroll Smith helped redesign the suspension. He lowered the ride height by 1 inch and changed the lower control arm positions. The shocks were made by Conan. The wheels were 17-inch Diamag magnesium units, and the tires were custom-built by Goodyear to handle speeds up to 300 miles per hour. The brakes included 13-inch ventilated discs up front and 11.5-inch rotors in the rear. The body, called the Aero Body, was designed by Paul Deutschmann and made from a material called Xenoi. It was smooth and helped cut down wind resistance. And yes, the car was driven 700 miles on public roads, from Connecticut to Ohio and back, just to prove it was legal. In 2004, the Sledgehammer was sold at Barrett-Jackson for $221,400. At another auction in 2014 by Macomb, it reached $600,000, but didn't sell. Today, the Callaway Sledgehammer is still a one-of-a-kind car. It shows how far someone can go when they mix smart engineering with a bit of bold thinking, and maybe a little bit of turbocharger madness.